Hi, everyone. This is Craig Zelizer from PCDN. Hi, Sahil. Welcome to our webinar on To Grad or Not to Grad. Delighted to have you joining us today. For those who may not know, PCDN is the go-to hub for global social change. So we're a one-stop shop for anything from jobs, fellowships, opportunities, networking. We are doing many new activities, and we just launched the world's first career helpline in social change. You can contact us about that. We have amazing job, fellowship, and internship and event postings about the whole ecosystem of change. We also are doing this entire year-long career series where each month we have a different theme on careers and change. And in a week, we're launching a podcast on careers and change. So the best way to stay informed about PCDN is join PCDN at pcdnetwork.org, follow us on social media, and sign up for our newsletter. It really is amazing. Again, I'm Craig Zelizer from PCDN, and I'm talking from 1776, which is an incubator co-working space in Arlington, Virginia, an amazing place. And we have two amazing, wonderful guests with us today, Sahil, Patni, and Riggio. And I'd like to thank them for taking time to join us today. We have people who are calling in. So far, I think we have New York, Colorado, India, California, and a couple of other places. So while you're listening, at any time we're using the Zoom platform, which we found to be one of the best for video conferencing. So at any time, if you have questions, you can put your comments or questions or feedback in the chat box. You can just go to the bottom of your screen, click on chat, there's a little chat box, and then you can put it there. Please, again, let us know where you're calling in from. And just to make a plug, this month is all about To Grad or Not to Grad. So we have an amazing collection of blog posts. We have the webinar. Next month is going to be about the very important topic, which if you do go to grad school or even if you don't, there's an amazing array of fellowships out there. So I'd encourage you to pay a lot of attention to next month's topic as well. And also say this month and next month are also sponsored. So we're happy to have a sponsor for the career series by the Rotary Peace Fellowship, which is one of the world's top fellowships for individuals seeking to advance peace building, impact, and change. And Rotary has been very generous to provide support. And I've taught in the Rotary Peace Fellowship program many times, and it really is one of the top fellowships in the world. So I'd encourage everyone to check it out. They have both a master's level fellowship and then a 2.5-month advanced practitioner training program that takes place in Thailand, and it's fully funded. One other note is this webinar is being recorded, so please just be aware, and we're going to put it online afterwards, so please just be aware, if you want to say anything controversial, maybe send it to me in an email, or if you do say something that you regret later on, just let me know and we'll try to edit it out. So again, I'm going to turn it over. We're going to start off with Bree. So Bree was a career advisor in the School of International Service at American University for quite some time. She has a bachelor's degree, a master's degree in Peace and Conflict Resolution, or IPCR, as AU people like to call it. She is also on the PCDN Career Advisory Board, which is the idea is tied to our career helping line, which is really getting expert wisdom to help people advance careers of purpose. And she has recently completed a cross-country trip and has gone from east to west and is now going to be starting a job tomorrow. So we're very glad that she joined us at UC Irvine in the School of Public Policy. And so Bree, each speaker is going to talk for about 5 to 8 minutes, just with some of their wisdom, reflections, and suggestions. You can also review their blog posts. While they're talking, if you have questions, put them in the chat box, and then we'll have at least probably 25 minutes for open questions and discussions later. I'll turn it over to you, Bree.
All right, well, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'll go briefly a little bit into my background. I'd like to leave a lot of time for questions if we can, so I'll try not to talk too much. But as Craig mentioned, so I most recently was a career advisor at the School of International Service at American University, which is also where I did my master's degree in International Peace and Conflict Resolution. I think, at least in regards to graduate school, my path to my master's program was pretty straightforward, pretty typical. But my journey once I got there and then following the master's program was perhaps a little bit more atypical. So to get a little bit into that, part of why I pursued a master's degree myself was it was just something that I thought, oh, this is just what people do. You want to keep advancing up kind of the ranks of your career, education. That's just the path you take. I realized a little bit too late in my undergraduate time that I was really interested in international relations. So to me, it made the most sense. Go get a degree focused on international relations. I will say that I realized very quickly then, about a semester into my program, that this was perhaps not the right decision, that I was perhaps in the wrong program, maybe even the wrong discipline. I had dreams of kind of going to work for a think tank or going into government, and then realized, again, that semester in, ooh, I don't want to be in government. I don't want to go work in a think tank. So what in the world am I doing here? I considered dropping out. I considered transferring actually to the program at Georgetown, which I had also gotten into, and was a little bit lost. I took 4 years to finish my master's degree and did eventually find my way, although now I work in a much different discipline or different industry than I ever anticipated. So now working in career advising, I work primarily with students. It's been focused on international relations and public affairs or public policy, figuring out career paths, career options, and part of that also includes talking with people about, okay, you want to go on to graduate school, you're looking at advanced degrees, which one makes the most sense, which school makes the most sense. And so to kind of round that out, I guess, I would say my two big takeaways or two big points about when you're thinking about, do I want to go to grad school? The first point would be, certainly think about where do you want to actually go, and where is this degree going to get you? I think I know I have a lot of friends, a lot of peers, and I've worked with a lot of students who, like me, considered, oh, well, this is just the natural kind of step that you take. But without really thinking kind of more in depth about, okay, well, where is this degree going to actually take your career? Or where is it not going to take your career? Is this actually the best fit? Is this the best program? Is this the faculty that I want to work with? And being able to answer that question for yourself, where do I want to be? Where do I want to go? That will also then help you hopefully answer your personal question or your personal statement questions when you're actually filling out applications. To that, then second point, I would say, how are you going to pay for it? And so that is something, I don't know, I mean, international programs, if you're going outside of the United States, the rules change a little bit just because different countries pay for their education or don't pay for education in different ways. But especially for US-based programs, it's a question or a consideration that I think a lot of the students and the clients that I've worked with don't necessarily kind of realize just how much these degrees cost until you're halfway through and until you're at the end of the line and suddenly you have $60,000, $80,000 of debt stacked up against you. So, I mean, I can talk a little bit more about that if there are questions, but I would say those are my two big takeaways. Where are you going? Where are you hoping to go? How is this degree going to help you get there? And then how are you going to pay for it?
Okay, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom. And I'm sure you've helped a lot of students at AU. And also, just if you're not following Bree on LinkedIn, she does a lot of blogging, and I find her blogs to be incredibly helpful for people who are trying to advance careers of purpose. So Riverside is very lucky to have you, and we're grateful to have you on the advisory board. So we're going to turn it over to Sahil Patni. So Sahil is a master of many things. So he was a business and consultant for Ernst & Young for many years, and we met Sahil at a career fair, and we were actually not looking for a consultant, but he was so impressive that we wound up hiring him as a consultant to PCDN to help with business development and systems and marketing, and he has been with us ever since as a part-time consultant. He's very busy doing many other things. And he's a master of Excel, system, sales, and just kind of thinking about revenue generation. He has an undergraduate degree from University of Maryland, and he recently completed a master's degree in India from Tara University in Sustainable Development Practice. Congratulations. He just finished his thesis a couple of months ago, and he actually just started a job. So I think you started this week, or you're in the middle of starting. So just like Bree, you both are quite generous to take time out of your schedule. It's also late at night in India, so we're not too late. But so Sahil's going to talk about kind of his journey of both going from a professional position to grad school, and also why did you choose to do it overseas? So I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, sure. Hi. So hello everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I'm Sahil Patni, and Craig gave a very generous introduction about me. So I'm just going to start off a little bit about my personal background first. So I was born and raised in India, in Mumbai, and I moved to the US when I was about 18 years old. And I went over there. I did a few jobs here and there, and finally I started my full-time undergraduate degree, which was, like he said, University of Maryland. So from there on started my first kind of career choice, my first background, which was actually in business. And my initial interest was in financial, undertakings and stock markets and all these things. So I completed the business program and also did a philosophy minor. So after the program, I jumped on to Ernst & Young. There I worked for about 4 years as a senior consultant. So the job entailed a lot of working in different environments with different kind of clients and, very challenging kind of environments as well. So that was still restricted to, this corporate world or this financial world, right? Over the years, during my undergrad, I actually realized something, like Bree mentioned, that, where do you want to go or where do you see yourself in the future? So this is between the period of about 2012 to 2015. And I realized that I actually want to work in the field of, social development or like the development sector, right? As I was thinking about it, I was thinking, how do I want to work in this field? Like what is the end goal and how do I want to get there? A few things got clear over the years, and I was sifting through a lot of programs like PhDs and, masters and in economics and development and sociology, everything. And I came to the understanding that the major interest after working in development was actually a geographical focus. So I wanted to move back to India and I wanted to work in the social sector here, right? So the geography was something that defined where I wanted to do the degree. So obviously to gain, kind of a contextual understanding for wherever I'm going to work for the next, my life for like 10, 15, 20 years, or most of my career, is where I should get a degree from, right? So, so that's the first thing to keep in mind, that wherever you want to work, geography and culture and these, slight nuances of how local systems function is very important. So for me, that was, doing field trips in India. That was meeting like NGOs over here, working with the NGOs over here, doing small assignments here and there. My research, my thesis, internship, studying about local policies and how local governance works and stuff like that. So it's basically all about context, right? So that's the first thing. That's how I chose India. The second thing that I considered was financial, the financial consideration, obviously. So money was a huge part, right? And if you consider some of these, the cost of some of these programs, they run into like hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? But in India, it was relatively cheap. Now, being from India and being, having that vision of finally working in India, that decision was slightly easy for me. So I'm not sure what, your background is or where you want to go. But if you can find this kind of a geography or have an interest in there, which also, where also the master's programs are a little cheaper, I think it's a good option to do that, because, maybe the systems or the exact education may not be the same as like say US or UK, but for me it was fine because the real value addition that I was getting was the context, and for that it made sense to move back. And as I was also saving a lot of money, right? So I did the 2-year program, and recently now I have started working with this foundation in India. It's called Swadesh Foundation, and it works for rural empowerment. And right now I am based in a rural part of Maharashtra, which is an Indian state, and I'm amazed we have like amazing network here, because sometimes the networks drop in and out. So great to have good network, and video is fine as well. So yeah, so I'm right now working with them in the economic development sector. We work with a lot of villages, about 360, we call it like Gram Panchayat, a cluster of villages, and that comes up to about 2,000 villages that we're working with, and we're working on economic development mainly. The two things that I would say that I took away, and I think that are very crucial for you to switch over from whatever you're doing now, like your studies or working, and switching over to a master's or a graduate program. One is technical skills. Technical skills are kind of seamless, right? So if you think about like say, Microsoft Excel, or think about project management, or having like a process-oriented thinking, where you're drawing out like business process flows, or having this structured or logical manner of thinking, right? That can be used in the corporate sector, in the government, in the social sector, wherever, right? So I picked up those skills from my finance background and Ernst & Young. And that I have also been able to use in my master's program, and hopefully will use in my job. But that is something that seamless. So any kind of technical skills that you can grab is going to be one key factor. The second key factor is to expand your kind of almost willingly go into zones that are uncomfortable. So break the barriers of wherever you're working right now and go into the most grueling of environments, because when our surrounding, our environment, our culture, and wherever we're going, when that changes, when that shifts, there's a whole slew of new learning, a new, very new perspective that we maybe have not gotten before. So I noticed that when I first moved from India to US, and I noticed that when I went from from US back to India, but a different city. And now I'm, for the first time, living actually in a rural area. So I have been seeing changing environments for the past almost 10 to 11 years, and it's been an amazing journey. So yeah, so just on that note, I'd like to end, and those are the two takeaways that I got from my experience, and open to any questions. Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much, both Sahil and Bree, and I'll just talk quickly, and then we'll go. We already have lots of questions coming in, and again, while we're chatting, feel free to add questions, comments, and let us know where you're zooming in from. So just very quickly, I wrote a very long blog post called The PhD or Not the PhD with a lot of data, so it's not just my opinion. So I hope people will look at that. And for the master's level, I'll say I did my undergrad in the US, and then I did a master's. I had a fellowship for a couple of years in Central and Eastern Europe, and then I did a master's at Central European University, which is a great university, and I was lucky to get a tuition fellowship, and it was a one-year program that was accredited through the UK and the US. So I did not accumulate any debt for my master's. My parents paid for my undergrad. So just, I was a professor for 10 years at Georgetown. It's a great, wonderful institution and had amazing students and colleagues, and I helped run the program. But the cost is very expensive, and I just think it's something, as Bree and Sahil both said, particularly if you're in a country where investment in higher education is not the level it should be, just really think seriously before accumulating a lot of debt. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but I've seen too many people, as Bree said, get into master's programs and come out with $100,000 in debt, and they haven't thought through their life choices or what the salaries will be. So what I would just say is a couple of things is, I'm going to focus mostly on PhD. So if you're going to do a PhD, 4 pieces of advice, and I'll just talk a little bit about my journey. When I started, I applied to lots of PhD programs in different sectors and different fields. I got full funding from quite a few places, but I actually went to a place that gave me no money. So that's also, so I'm going to say sometimes you don't always do what you think you should do, because I've turned down full fellowships, not to brag, but it's like they were not the right choices for me. And so I wound up doing the PhD at George Mason. Because the main reason I chose that over other programs is, for me, I decided to do a PhD because I really want to do better practice. I didn't want to be a theoretician, and I did not want to wind up in a PhD program where I spent 4 to 7 years or 10 years thinking about theory and not having real connections to the world. And I'm generalizing. I'm not saying all PhD programs are theoretical. You need both theory, research, and practice, but it was a very deliberate choice for me. And to be 100% honest, I did not like having to pay. It was a state university, and I got in-state residency, so it wasn't too expensive. So I had a big resentment that I did not get a fellowship, but in the end, it was actually a blessing, because the work experience I got the whole time I was doing the PhD was more valuable. So not to say the PhD wasn't valuable, but I worked for a lot of different NGOs, managed projects, got funding, so that work experience in conjunction with the PhD for me was the right combination. And if I'd only done a PhD and not had the work experience, I think my career would be totally different. So the 4 things about PhD. First, PhD is not about being smart. It's about perseverance. So if you're considering doing a PhD, you probably can, but it doesn't matter how smart you are. I may have a few friends who are geniuses. Maybe they can finish very quickly, but most people think you have to be brilliant to do a PhD. It's not about brilliance. It's about perseverance. So you cannot finish a PhD overnight unless you buy one online, a fake PhD. So it takes a lot of time and effort. Obviously, each country is different, but just think about, are you ready for the long, hard slog of doing a PhD? And to put that into context, and I'm speaking mostly from North America. So my PhD took me 8.5 years. So think about that, 8.5 years of my life of this huge thing hanging over me. And yes, there was moments of inspiration, wonderment, incredible intellectual activity, great community, but also 8.5 years of working on something is incredibly cumbersome, frustrating, depressing, soul-sucking. I think most people think they're going to finish their PhDs very quickly. And I'm speaking about social sciences. It's different in math or natural sciences. So most people think they're going to finish very quickly. Very few people finish as quick as they think they're going to. So just be aware of that. And I thought when I started my program, it'd be done in 4 years, 5 years, and anyone who took longer was just stupid. And then it took me forever. The second thing is as both Bree and Sahil said, is really think about money. So most good PhD programs do provide funding, not all. And again, I had funding opportunities, but chose not to go to those. But one of the things most people don't think about is, yes, a PhD can open a lot of doors, but in my blog post, I write about, if you get a stipend for your PhD, particularly about North America, it might be between $12,000 to $25,000 a year, plus you don't have to pay tuition. So that's a huge benefit. But that's not a livable salary for almost any city, any major city. Like maybe if you're at Notre Dame, very good place, a more rural university, you could live on that. So you have to factor, if you're going to have 5 to 6 or 7 years of your life on a PhD, you're out of the job market, not making whatever your normal salary would be, whether it's $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, again, US terms. So the way I put that in the blog post is basically saying, so let's say a PhD takes you, let's say 6 years. If you get $15,000 stipend in the PhD, that's $90,000 you've made. But if you have, let's say, a $60,000 salary, that's $360,000 you'd earn in income. So you have to factor in that deficit. Like you're actually not making $270,000 that you could have made. So it's not to put it in crude terms, but most people don't think about that. And then the two other things I would say is academic jobs are very scarce. So if you're doing a PhD and your dream is to be a professor, I'm not saying don't do it, because I had a great job as a professor and career. So it's certainly possible, but just be aware of how few opportunities there are and how few permanent opportunities, whether it's contract or tenure track. And I have lots of friends who've gotten great jobs as professors, so you certainly can do it. Just do not assume if you do a PhD that then you're going to have an academic job. Forget it. So think about it, make it an option, a goal, but also you need to think about what other things can you do with a PhD in case you don't get an academic job, or you get an academic job in a place you would never want to live that pays horribly. So quality of life is important. So maybe you get an academic job. I don't want to name a city, but let's say in the middle of nowhere where there's it's very rural kind of place where you don't want to spend the rest of your life. So just be aware of that, and that actually an increasing number of academic positions are adjunct and very poorly paid. And I think that's the future. So universities are investing less in permanent full-time faculty, and maybe it'll change. And again, what I'm talking about is North America. So if you can do a PhD, I almost did my PhD in the UK. It would have probably taken 3 years. I had funding, I didn't do that. So each country is different, but always investigate the salaries, what you can do with the PhD, and also the trade-off you're making, both in terms of sanity, but also money. So I think I'll stop there. So we have quite a few questions that have come in. And again, while we're going through this, feel free to add additional questions. Let us know where you're chatting in from. If you've got a longer question or you want to share a story, you can click on your screen, or I can turn your video and mic on. But let's just start off. So first, Lori just asked about my shirt. I'm not making a plug, but it's from a fair trade organization called Global Mamas, just to put that in. I put the link in there. So Lori had a very specific question, so I think we'll leave that to Bree. It's about doing a PhD in communications, so we'll come back to that. So Alta had a question: how important is it to do a brand name graduate program? So does it make a difference if you do Georgetown or Riverside versus a place that maybe is good but people haven't heard of? So do either of you have opinions on that? Maybe let's start with Bree and then go to Sahil.
Yes, so I do have a very strong opinion on this, actually. And I would say, and again, this is just my personal opinion, I would say that brand name probably does not matter as much, with one caveat, one big caveat. And so in general, and I say this partly just because, what Craig was saying, comparing kind of Georgetown to University of California, Riverside, at the end of the day, there's a lot of factors that go into picking kind of the best or the best fit for you with a graduate program. And brand name is potentially one of them. So I think for some people that really does matter. And I think even too in some industries that brand name will matter more than others. So the example I hear a lot is with law school. So if you want a particular career path as a lawyer, you really do want to aim for kind of the top 5 or the top 10 law schools. But I think for the majority of people who are going on to get an advanced degree, you're really wanting to look more at the cost. What am I actually going to pay to get this experience, to get this education? Where do the alumni of these programs go? So people who have come before me, what types of careers are they pursuing? If the name brand school, if all the alums are doing something you don't necessarily want to do, well, then maybe the brand name doesn't actually matter that much. Maybe you would be better suited at a program that's a little bit more focused on where you want to go, what you want to do, and if it's cheaper, so much the better. The one caveat I would say to that is that brand names, people tend to know brand names a little bit more, and sometimes those networks are a little bit stronger. So again, the example, and maybe you could speak more to this to yourself, Craig, but so I did work at Georgetown University for a period of time working in the Security Studies program, which is one of the master's programs under the School of Foreign Service. So I was doing admissions, advising, and then running their international exchange program. And what I found there was that the Georgetown, at least the alumni for that program, people knew that Security Studies program in Washington, D.C. So in D.C., in the intelligence community, in government, that name meant something. The name of the program, the name of Georgetown, but that was very specific to that region and that type of industry. Out here in California now, I guarantee you there's a bunch of my colleagues and friends, they know Georgetown just because that's a big name, but the Security Studies program doesn't necessarily mean anything to them just because the focus is different out here on the West Coast, different industries, there are different schools, different kind of powerhouses in higher education. So that would be my one caveat, depending on, I think there's a few situations geographically bound by geography and bound by industry where name brand could potentially get a reaction out of someone, could potentially get you further if the network in that area is strong and that it's attached to that name brand recognition. But I'm of the personal opinion that there are so many other factors that could go into picking a good program for yourself that consider it if it's important to you. But I don't think it's a deal breaker. I don't think it'll make or break your career, because at the end of the day, even if you get that name brand degree, you still have to be the one going out there and interviewing, applying for jobs, and impressing people and networking. That comes down to you. The degree's not going to do the heavy lifting for you.
Good. Thank you very much. And Sahil, anything you want to add, or how you chose Terry and how well it's known in India or other places?
Yeah, sure. So I will speak to the branding part from like a local geography perspective again. I chose Terry because Terry has a reputation for working in, this like in research and in environment and all that since the 70s. So it was originally a research institute. It still is. And in about 2000 something, they started this Terry University, which is the university arm of Terry. So considering the decades of experience and name that comes along wherever Terry has, they have offices all over the world and they do a lot of studies and all these things. And that's one of the reasons that I chose that, okay, it'll have a nice name throughout the world, also in India, specifically in environment, climate change and these things. So just to be careful of one thing, there's an incident that happened while I was entering Terry. It was almost the same month that I entered Terry actually. That one of our top persons, a key person from the Institute Terry, was involved in some kind of a legal issue. Okay, and that happened after my interview happened. I accepted the thing. I said yes, and I packed my bags, packed my life from US, and I was moving to India, and this happened. So that didn't work that well for the branding for that little bit. However, afterwards, I found out that Terry, it had a name, but the quality was kind of degrading a little bit. But the historically the name that was there was in the circles within India in this in research and environment and all that. What changed afterwards was that not the incident that what happened with the top person in the news and everything, but what I had perceived of branding to be, this is the cautionary tale. So of branding to be was actually for a particular field. So the particular field that I had perceived before was actually environmental sciences, climate change, global warming, and these things. They also worked on development issues, social development, economic development, and all that. However, that was to a very lesser degree, a much lesser degree than what I had thought. So like Bree mentioned about the security studies program and what Georgetown is known for, and then what the security studies program is known for. is different based on, who is looking at that information. So the employees that I was looking at were, mostly in livelihoods and, sustainable livelihoods, economic development, and these things. So there was a tendency of not knowing the name because the name is bigger in, say, a different field, climate change or environment. So for whatever you're looking at, right? If you look at a geography that's outside the US, then also consider that within that particular country, how big is that brand name, and does it really ring a bell with those particular employees that you want to work for? And apart from just the Google and the online searches, if you know people on the ground, or even if you don't, try to find people on the ground who can ascertain that yes, it is like like a professor from a different university, another employer, someone you may know, a second, third degree of connection or something, but ascertain that the brand is really, it is there if you're going for that. And just to add on just one last thing, within the entire picture of making a decision, I strongly chose my my program because of like the context and geography and what the academic program offered. The branding was never like that big of a deal for me. It was a few years earlier when I was considering programs in US and other big brands in US. But the whole image of branding kind of shattered. And then when I chose India, and then I was like, okay, in India, what's the best brand? Okay, it's Cherry. And it didn't make that much of a difference. I like the program better. But yeah, that was my small story with the branding thing.
Thank you very much. And just to make a comment, so in terms of Sahil's case, he worked for Ernst & Young, which is known globally. So you also have to look at your career path. So if you already have like a brand name employer or like a Fulbright fellowship or something in your track record, then maybe the brand name isn't as important of the university. But if you don't have some employer or some halfway well-known university, it's something you might think about. But I don't. But as Bree said, you have to be very careful. And one thing I would just suggest, like whether you have a fellowship or you're paying full price or discount price, like interview the university. Don't just decide based on the website. Talk to the faculty, talk to the alumni, make sure they actually have career services. So a lot of universities might have good curriculum, they have no career services or not career services in your field. Make sure there's not just one superstar faculty you'll never meet. So really, like, you're investing, even if you're not paying for it, you're investing your time and energy. So, I mean, don't be egotistical, but take the time out, do all the research and come with specific questions. And I can say as a professor, I loved, some students would be like, tell me about your program. It really didn't interest me that much, but the ones who came and said, I've done all my research, here's these very specific questions I have. They were like almost interviewing us about what we offered. And I actually loved it because it showed they put the thought in and they were taking this as a serious decision. Say the students who did that kind of work and had a good academic record were more likely to get fellowships. There's not a one, but the people who were academic qualified and did their research and made a convincing case why they wanted to come to my program and had the right set of skills. Like if you stand out in a positive way, I mean, not a negative way, because some potential students are always like, give me, and they're not engaging. But it's really just how do you engage. So thank you very much. We have a couple of questions from Lori. So one is, this is, I guess, in general, like, when do you know whether to do a PhD or not? So, for example, I think he already has a couple of masters. So is a PhD the next logical step? Because he does not want to be a professor. And Lori, if you want to turn your screen or mic on and provide a little bit of context, you don't have to. But, so how do you know if you've already got a master's, is the PhD the next logical step? Particularly if you don't want to be a professor, but is it better to have another master's or just keep getting other degrees, or is it just getting work experience? So I don't know if either of you have thoughts, or Lori. So he just texted, he says that works. So it might be hard to chat, to turn his video on. So do either of you have any thoughts about that? Like, when do you know if a PhD is the right decision? If you already have a master's.
Yeah. So I think, and well, Craig, I mean, just from your own experience, at least in the few individuals that I've worked with, or students or alums who have PhDs, I have often found that those who have not gone to get the PhD for an academic career, or to try and build that, have often found themselves in kind of this weird space where, from the employer's perspective, then when they're applying for jobs, they almost look overqualified or are overqualified. And then often the advice that, as we go back and forth in our conversation, the advice actually comes out to be, well, maybe we want to take your PhD actually off your resume so that you don't come across as having too much education or communicating inadvertently that you might be looking for a higher salary than what the position has been budgeted for. That being said, I mean, I think considering master's versus PhD, I think it comes back down to looking at kind of, okay, where have the alumni of these programs gone? Where have people who have completed this master's program or this PhD program, do they go on to academic careers by and large? If they do, that's a pretty good indication to you that, well, that's who your network's going to be when you do graduate yourself, and that's a likely career path. That being said, if there's a PhD program out there that's focused more on building kind of practitioner or practitioner scholars versus academics, if those alumni, the people who go through that program, if they're pursuing then careers or jobs that you are interested in and that PhD is kind of a necessity, then yeah, that might be a good indication to you that, yeah, maybe the PhD really is something to pursue at that point. The other thing to consider, which hasn't come up yet, is this idea of executive education or executive PhD programs. And these programs are specifically designed for those individuals who are further along mid-career or higher, and they're looking to go back and get a PhD that's more focused on building the next step in their career versus going the academic route. However, the key with those programs is that because they are designed for those who are further along in their careers, you may have to build up a certain number of years of work experience before you kind of fit the mold or qualify for those positions. But that might be something to consider as well. If you're a little bit unsure, at least explore to kind of look down the line. Is this something I could pursue in 5 years, 10 years? I know it's certainly something that I myself am looking at down the line, but that's, something to consider.
Next time we'll call you Dr. Bree. Sahil, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I just have one quick thought. That in my 2 years of masters that I've interacted with, other PhDs and doctors, I've seen that there are these two kinds of PhDs that are either academic or practitioner focused. So the academic ones clearly know that is what they want to do, and they get a master's and then they get a PhD. They get into a PhD program. The practitioner ones usually have some kind of experience before. Regardless of whatever you do, I think I have seen, of the resumes that I've seen, I've talked to professors and other people, I have seen experience throughout seamlessly for both of those. And when I say experience, these are like within the PhD, they do these kind of consulting or contractor roles, or research here and there, or some field work or something. Where you get some kind of work experience. So I think work experience is kind of the common denominator, regardless of whatever kind of PhD you want to do. Having said that, that is my observation. Having said that, I think having some experience before you get into a PhD program would definitely make sense in your career. That doesn't mean you need to, just get like 6 months or a year of experience and then, but maybe a couple of years and then you get into the PhD program. It depends on what your end goal is. Of, do you want to become an academic, or do you want to go the practitioner route? Like you see Craig's experience, he gained work experience. That was his like the culmination of his PhD, that he thought that was a great route to take, and that's what he did later on, right? So I think having some experience definitely would make sense. With that grain of salt, just I am not a doctor, I'm not a PhD, but this is just my observation. Yeah.
So I would just add two thoughts. I think I said this at the beginning. So one, and everything is context specific. So investigate in your country, or if you want to do, in Kenya or South Africa or UK, each place is different. But a PhD, you need to have a certain level of intellectual curiosity. I'm not talking brilliance, but just curiosity and perseverance. So you need to have something that's going to sustain you to do this in-depth research. And for me, it was actually, I think, 2 or 3 years of classes, even though I transferred to my master's. So you have to have intellectual curiosity to sustain yourself and be organized and persevere. And if you don't have that, it's almost like don't even bother. Like don't just do a PhD because you think you should. And then again, as Bree said, for me, I think it's an asset, because when you do have a PhD, people assume you're smart, whether or at least you're more qualified, even if you're not. So I think that most countries, a doctor or professor carries a certain cachet, not in all countries. So I think that gives me a better degree of flexibility if I have a meeting or want to get access to somebody, and I have other credentials, but it definitely opens a lot of doors. I think that a master's is almost like the new BA. So that does help, but it also, I do know people, and I've hired for positions, like we hired for a certain level position, we got 300 applications, and there was no way we were going to hire a PhD, it was overqualified. So you have to think, like, what kind of positions would you go for with a PhD? And if you get the right set of work and skills, experience, not just doing the degree, then you can maybe go between academia, government, nonprofit, foundation. But if you only do a PhD and don't have work experience, your career options are going to be more limited. I think in particular, if you want to work on policy, run an organization, go and teach some, then a PhD can be useful. But just be aware there's not that many academic jobs. So just think about it seriously before you do it. And also you can look some countries, like I said, if I had done my PhD in the UK, if I had finished, I don't know, I probably would have done it in 3 years. It's a different model. And so we have a whole bunch more questions. So one is, Alta said that, do you recommend having a couple of years work experience before going back to school? She's hearing that generally, like, people are saying you should have at least 2 to 3 years of work experience and then go to grad school, or if you come right out of undergrad, is it okay to go into grad school? What is your experience and your recommendation? Let's start with Sahil.
Sure. For grad school, having answered about PhD, I would only talk about masters now. I would strongly recommend to have experience before you go in for grad school. So I think that the perspective of how you learn the content and how you're kind of grasping on to this new knowledge, which is more specialized since it's masters, is going to be very different based on what your experience is. So if you have worked in the government or, like, say, corporate or the social sector, whatever you gain, you have kind of a sort of a paradigm in your mind that, okay, how the world works, or how the working world works, right? And you kind of constantly think about it, churn it in your head that what do you want to grab out of your master's degree, and then where do you want to go in the future, right? So it's like, how we say that every experience counts. And I think in order to get the most out of your specialized master's program, whatever that course is, right? It is very important to have at least some kind of experience, to have a baseline, to have kind of those, gutters on the side, or that kind of vision of what do you put that master's knowledge against. So if you so for instance, I had my background in corporate and in consulting in financial services. That gave me a lot of background to pit my master's degree against. So the master's was all about social, but I had a corporate background. So whatever I was learning about how fieldwork is, how research works, how methodology is, or how NGOs function, and all these things, I was pitting that against the large banks and the financial institutions and insurance companies that I've worked for in the US, or how the EY, Ernst & Young, works in this large consulting company with hundreds and thousands of people. So how they work. So everything I was putting against that, and I think that gave me kind of like is a nuanced understanding of whatever the professor was teaching, or whatever we were learning out of our field experiences or our case studies. So I think having some kind of experience definitely is good. It just gives you a different perspective of whatever you were gonna get out of your master's. Just make sure in mind that to have the best kind of experience that sets you in, puts you in the best position for that master's. That's all I would say. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bri, anything additional?
Yeah, I would say, so I would also, I would echo that and say yes, that having at least 2 years of work experience is definitely a plus, because you just view the program, you're able to engage with your peers on kind of a different level. And some master's programs out there actually require 2 years of work experience, or 3 years, or 1 year, whatever it may be. But the other thing too, I would say that having work experience in advance also gives you an opportunity to figure out, okay, is this actually what I want to do? Before you commit all of the time and energy and money into a master's program, that work experience, taking that 2 years, that 3 years, can help you decide, yes, okay, I do want to go the policy route, or I want to go the government route, or I want to go international. And so that is also information for you to help make the best possible graduate program decision for you. I myself, I had 2 years of work experience before I went into my peace and conflict resolution program. I worked for the Fulbright program, the Fulbright Scholars Program, I actually, in my case, that 2 years was not enough. It was enough for me to decide, okay, I want to do IR, but I would say it actually wasn't enough for me to really kind of dive deep and figure out, okay, I'm interested in some aspects of this topic or this discipline intellectually, but how does that actually translate into day-to-day work and long-term careers? And so I had to play a little bit of I had a very long journey then when I was in graduate school to figure out how to get all the pieces together. But had I taken more time, I may have come to a different conclusion. It probably actually would have made more sense to pursue a degree in an entirely different discipline, at least career-wise, that would have made more sense. But that being said, there are some people, and I've met countless students who do come from right out of undergrad, and they know they've done a lot of planning, they've done a lot of thinking, and they know straight out of undergrad that they want to do a master's program. The one thing I would say to that is what I found from my time in admissions, those of you who are coming straight from undergrad and wanting to go into graduate school, there is an extra onus or an extra burden on you in your personal statement to explain why you want that master's degree and why you need it now. Why do you need it before you go out and get some work experience? The students or the applicants who were able to successfully argue why they needed the master's degree and why they needed it right then at that moment, those were the ones who typically got in.
And I think the only thing I would add is like everyone's got to make their own decision based on your unique context. So there is no absolute right or wrong. So again, I had a couple years experience. It made my grad school experience richer, much richer. But but like just because it sounds like the three of us are saying having experience is better doesn't mean you have to decide that. It's like whatever, because there is an advantage to just getting grad school done and then like moving on with your life. So to say like in the end, like weigh all the factors, like your career trajectory, your family, cost of living, all those things, and just figure out like what's the right thing. And in the end, like make the best decision you can at that time and don't stress about it too much because there's no perfect time. So we have a question from Tammy. She's thinking about getting an MA in conflict resolution, but she's concerned about how mature the job market is. So can we talk about getting a master's degree in conflict? And I would reframe this and say, getting a master's degree in any general social science field, so it could be sociology, international relations, like, is it worth getting a master's in a field that doesn't have a defined career trajectory or not a huge amount? Even MBAs, there's some truth to that. So what would be your advice for someone thinking about conflict resolution or some other field where it's emerging and the career tracks are not as strong as other places? Let's start with Bree.
Sure. Yes. So having a degree in international conflict resolution or international conflict. So the job market, yes, the job market I would say is probably not as robust as some other industries. I've found from my peers who have gone through the program or comparable programs at other universities that really you are looking to stay potentially in Washington, D.C., New York, going abroad, a little bit of San Francisco if your regional focus is on Asia. Now, that's not to say that you can't take your degree elsewhere, but if you are looking at specific degrees like that, they do have kind of their niche geographical locations, and that's pretty much where you can expect to find the most opportunities. The thing that I would say just about, I categorize it as master's in international relations, but I think you could expand it to social sciences as well, is that so unlike an MBA, although there's some of it there as well, an MBA or a JD or some of these very well-defined programs where employers or other people out there are kind of going to know what they're getting. So if you have an MBA, that communicates that you have a very specific training or background to an employer. Master of Arts or Master of Science in International Relations or Sociology, those can mean different things depending on your program, depending on your school. And so I would say that no matter, where you're going, a lot of the burden does fall on you as the individual who got the degree. Understand, and this kind of ties back on my point of understand what you're getting and where you want to go. What types of training, education, experiential, whatever it is, are you getting through your program? And then figure out, once you're able to identify that, it's up to you to kind of communicate that and sell that to potential employers. So you could get a degree in conflict resolution. I think there are some very specific types of career paths you could go down that really look for that particular degree. My advice would be to, if you're thinking about what types of jobs you want to do, go online and start reading job descriptions of jobs that interest you. Maybe you know you're not qualified for them yet, but you could potentially be. Go out, read those job descriptions, read a lot of job descriptions and start to see what are the requirements. Are they looking for a master's in general? Are they looking specifically for a master's in conflict resolution? So I think what you'll find is that there are very few jobs that specifically want the conflict resolution, but they want a master's in international relations, a master's in social sciences. You can kind of play with it then. You can argue, you can market yourself however you want based on the actual training you've got. I don't know if that's necessarily answering the question.
So I'll just say a little bit and just to repeat the question. So Tammy's thinking about doing a master's in conflict resolution, and she's asking, is it worth the investment considering the job market may not be as mature in that sector as compared to others? And then we reframed it a little bit saying most master degrees in international relations or social sciences have a similar issue. So I would say three things. So again, going back to what Bree said, is investigate programs very seriously. So, I mean, at Georgetown, we did a lot of good things, not perfect, but we had a lot of skills-based activities. We had fellowships for students to go overseas. We had an amazing career center. So it doesn't mean everyone got a great job. That's not the case, but it's like you want to go to a place where they're setting up for success. So do not just go to, I mean, my advice is don't pick a program just because the curriculum sounds great. Like, what are people doing with that? The second thing is, in some ways, a master's in conflict resolution is an advantage. In some ways, it's a disadvantage. So the advantage is there's a gazillion amount of people doing masters in IR. It's like, you know, it's everywhere now. Like, what does it even mean? I'm not criticizing. And conflict resolution, there's probably about 200 graduate programs in the world, you know, or more. So it's still relatively new. So in some ways, that degree makes you stand out. So if you do a master's in conflict resolution, like, make sure you get relevant skills. And I did a book a few years ago called Integrated Peace Building, which basically the idea is for conflict resolution to be successful, it needs to be integrated into other sectors. So if you're going to do a conflict resolution, think about, or any master's in international affairs, get a second sector expertise. So be like conflict resolution, humanitarian relief, or conflict resolution in tech, or conflict resolution and microfinance. But if you get that kind of dual expertise with some geographic experience, it makes you much more hireable. But if you come out of any generic master's in international relations or conflict and all you have is a degree and no expertise, there's 300 to 400 to 500 other people applying for the same job, and you're not going to be that hireable. So it's really, like, really think about that is quite important. And so, Sahil, you have anything to answer or to add in terms of thinking about doing a master's, you know, maybe where the job market's not as mature?
Right. Yeah, so I'd only say that it definitely makes sense to research your job market very, very well. Now, my degree was quite interdisciplinary and broad. It was Master's in Sustainable Development Practice. And out of that, you could almost, you know, kind of specialize in the field or the subject that you wanted to, and then that job market would be open to you. Even if, you know, you couldn't find a job in whatever you wanted to specialize in, the degree was so broad that you could pretty much get into a fallback option. So that was fine. I'm not specifically sure about conflict resolution, but I would just generally say about anything that's very specific, you will need to have at least some parameter open, in the sense that if you want a job in conflict resolution in DC area, then maybe you'd have to look outside DC. If you want it in US and you're not getting it, maybe you'll have to look outside US. Or outside the scope of employers that you were initially looking at. So basically, you know, all these parameters go into you know, figuring out which job will you get out in the field in the job market, and you will have to loosen up on something, you know, after a few months of search and so on and so forth, in order to get where you know, the kind of job that you want to get. So there are always these trade-offs, you know. So that is something that you need to consider going forward. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we have a couple of minutes left, so I want to see if Bree or Sahil, you have anything you want to emphasize, or is there a case you would say to somebody, they come to talk to you and you say, whatever you do, don't go to grad school, like just don't, like, you know, is there a clear red line? Sometimes you're talking to someone and just like, don't spend the time or money. So do you have any advice, like, don't do it? And then while we're waiting, I want to see if there's any other questions from the audience. We have a few more minutes. So would either of you like to say something when you would just say, you know, your advice would be, don't go forward?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you're doing just fine in your career and your personal life, intellectually, and you don't have a master's and you don't need a master's, absolutely don't get it. I try and advise my students, only really start thinking about, okay, what master's makes sense, what next step makes sense if you realize that you need it. So if you're in your current job and you've plateaued and you realize that in order to get that promotion or get into that kind of that next step up the career ladder, that you need the master's. I have encountered a few people who just, they wanted intellectual stimulation. They felt like they needed some kind of shift, or to, like, mid-career, needed to kind of shake up their brain and get the creative intellectual juices flowing, and made it work. And it was just a personal endeavor to go get a PhD. And so they completed it. But I think my big thing would be, don't get the degree just because you think you have to get it. And I say that partly from working with individuals who have pursued that path and then kind of ended up in this kind of sticky situation later. And also from my own experience, I went and got a degree because I wanted to. I definitely wanted to. I love being in school, but I definitely did pursue the degree because I thought it's what I needed to do. And then it turned out I didn't actually need to do it. It's worked out, but I didn't actually need it.
Okay. And Sahil, any advice in terms of when you would tell a friend or someone approaching you, do not do grad school, in your opinion?
Sure. So by grad school, I would definitely say for PhD, it's a huge commitment, like Craig already talked about. So definitely consider that that is a huge factor, whether you really want to do it. Because what Craig said is what I've heard from many other people about doctorate programs. In terms of masters, I think I'd echo Bree and say that it depends on where you are in your in your job, in your life situation, whether you're satisfied or not. So only consider a master's if you think there is a need for a change, for some kind of change. Either it's in your field, going to a higher level, maybe a managerial level, or switching your field. Like I switched from the corporate sector to development. So if it's that, then that, right? So depending on the need, just assess that and see how it fulfills that. So it may be a master's that will fulfill that need. It may simply be a job change. Maybe you don't even need a master's. You can just, based off your experience, you can just switch your job and that'll satisfy the need, right? So I don't know. So it depends. So assess that need first and see whether master's is the answer for your for fulfillment. That's all.
And I think what I would say, one of the intellectual questions we're trying to start exploring at PCDN is, in the tech world, more and more employers say we don't care if you have a degree at all. We care about your skills. In the kind of social sector, that hasn't happened. So it's still, I've seen many friends hit a plateau with a BA, with 8 to 10 years experience, and they have the intellectual curiosity, but they know they need to get a master's to move up the kind of to higher level management. So I think that's still the trend, but it will be interesting to see, the idea that talent can come from anywhere, and do you need to have a master's degree to move up? And is the social sector going to start adapting some of the things from the tech industry, saying we want to see your skills rather than your credentials? So that's, but I would say, it's at least worth looking. I mean, I love graduate programs. I've done, highest level. I've been professor for 10 years. So I think they're wonderful. I would always encourage people to explore them and to really seriously consider, but I also say also explore the opposite. So what would be, if you don't go to grad school, could you take that money and, get meaningful experience and live in India, or start your own business, or get your own credentials, or there's alternative programs like Amani Institute. I'm on their advisory board, or kind of these skills-based intensive programs, which I think can be quite good for some people. So I don't think I would say do one over the other. And in general, I'm still in favor of doing graduate school as long as you think about cost, credentials, experience. But it's at least do the intellectual exercise. If you don't do it, what would your life be like, or what's the alternative? So we have one last question, and then we'll finish up. So Alton wants to know, what's the strongest needs in terms of skills and development today? So anything you want to say? I guess I would interpret that as meaning, like, what are the emerging trends where people who are in grad school or thinking about it should focus on to have a bigger impact and be more employable? So maybe, and she added to her question, would it be useful to get an MBA coding, or she's saying trends? So maybe let's start with Sahil and then Bree, and then we'll finish up. So from your experience, what are the emerging trends you'd encourage people to focus on?
So like I said, I mean, the two kinds of skills that have helped me before are technical skills, that's one, and soft skills. So technical skills you can gain based off experience and just learning on your own, and there are so many online programs and MOOCs and stuff, so you can do those. And the second one is soft skills, which I personally think is the best way to learn that is to push yourself into uncomfortable zones and be where you haven't been before, or are very uncomfortable, because that's where the greatest learning is going to happen. So like interpersonal skills or social skills, whatever it is, right? That has been my prior experience. So I think those two areas of skills are something that are really useful.
Okay, Bree?
Yeah, I would only add on to that quantitative and qualitative skills. If you're looking at, I'm not sure if development means like international development, but yeah, I mean, quantitative skills are great no matter what. And then in particular in kind of the international development world, monitoring and evaluation, monitoring development program monitoring are certainly useful.
And I think what I would add is looking at the intersection of tech and social change. So there's a lot of geeks who are very strong in tech skills. There's a lot of people who want to do good, but that intersection of geeks for good or do-gooders who are geeks, there's so much opportunity there, and that's both in the tech world, but also big data visualization. And I would say knowing how to tell a compelling story and all the tools you need to develop, measure, and kind of communicate that is a huge set of skills, from not just doing social media, but kind of tracking and campaigning, not just making a video, but really knowing the skills of 21st century communication. And then so many people don't know how to get money. So they want to do good, but they don't understand the industry and the financing. And so Sahil had that a lot from his business experience, but really understanding how do you attract money, how do you manage money, and how do you run a budget is so important. And most people coming to grad programs have no clue unless they have prior work experience. So we're out of time, so I'd like to thank Sahil and Bree for your two different parts of the world. So we've got from India to California. So particularly for Sahil, since it's late at night, so it's getting late, for sharing your experience when you both are starting new jobs. And thank everyone for sharing your questions. I think we got to most of them. If you have additional questions, you can email us at info@pcdnetwork.org. And just to put in a plug, again, this month is sponsored by Rotary, the Peace Fellowship, and so next month, the whole month is on fellowship. So we kept saying, think about the money. And so one of the ways to think about money is find someone to pay for you to go to school. And so we're going to be talking both about fellowships for grad school, but also other types of fellowships that have nothing to do with grad school. And so too many people think about professional experience as interning, grad school, or employment, but there's this amazing range of other things you can do where actually people are paying you to do it. And then just to put in a plug for anyone who's in DC, the Alliance for Peacebuilding annual conference is in 2 weeks. And there's both the main conference and there's a Young Professionals Forum that anybody, I think the forum has a little bit of money, but if you're thinking about grad school or want to understand the field of peacebuilding, it's an amazing event. And then next month is also Net Impact, which is one of my favorite events as well in Atlanta, super cheap. Contact us for more details, and thank you. But this will be recorded. If anybody said anything you will regret later on, drop us an email, but it'll go up online. And thank you very much, and have a great evening, afternoon, and morning. Thank you.
Thank you.